Well, hi, I'm Jess Cannell, and I just want to welcome you to episode 1 of Ask Not. I've gotten through the opening portions and chapter 1. We're just going to work our way through this book, and I don't know the exact pace that we'll take, but I'm just going to kind of go at the rate that feels good. And so hopefully that works for you. If you have feedback about that, you are really super welcome to offer that. I want this to be collaborative where you guys totally feel comfortable sharing with me. Like, this is my first time going through a book like this. So if I rush through a portion and you need me to tell you more backstory or whatever, just let me know that in the comments. You can always leave me any comment. I just want to make that very clear. This book is not just about the Kennedys. It is actually about the women whose lives were affected and even destroyed, upturned. And so it is everything from mistresses to wives to sisters to the women that were affected by the Kennedy men. And we know a lot of the stories of the Kennedy men, but oftentimes these stories have gone untold. Quick highlight for those of you who have not seen the invitation video. Some of the women mentioned are obviously Jackie Onassis. We're going to be dealing with her all throughout the book. Marilyn Monroe, Rosemary Kennedy, who was a sister to JFK and RFK. Mary Jo Kopechne, lots of different women. First today, I just kind of wanted to set the stage the way that Maureen Callahan, she is our New York Times best-selling author who is leading us through these stories. She is our guide through this process, and she is the one who has done the research. And I thought this quote was so fantastic. If you don't have the book yet, that's okay. My goal in this is to provide you with kind of a wonderful listening experience where if you've read the book or you plan to read the book, you can still enjoy reading the book, but where if you don't plan to read the book, you can just kind of enjoy this narration, enjoy hearing these stories and learning these things. And I'll be able to share what I'm learning, and you will be able to also enjoy that process. That's my hope. So you can let me know how I do at that. But this opening quote, I really think by the book's end that we will be thinking that this opening quote is dead on. Here's what she says. It's from F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. She says, "They were careless people. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made." You're going to see one of the central Kennedy figures in this story today that fits that quote to a T. We open up with the author's note. And I do want to read you a few of these author's notes because I think it's really important that we understand her goals in writing this book and how she came to where she did. She said, just like I just said, she spent years going through methods that are common to nonfiction historians. She mentions interviews, original interviews, archives, personal journals, biographies, memoirs, contemporaneous news reports, all the things that you would want to do to get a good historical account. But then she says her goal was to provide the closest, most accurate approximation of their thoughts and feelings. And she says, I would often ask those who were closest to these women if my assessments sounded fair. And only those agreed upon conclusions, those thoughts and reactions, are the ones you'll read here. So her goal was not just to find one-offs where somebody said JFK Jr. said this, or, well, one friend suspected that this was happening. She went to people who were close to these women that we are going to be reading about, and she asked, does this sound fair? Does this sound like her? You know, could you see her feeling this in 1992 or whatever? So I think that's really helpful information. And then she starts out with the prologue, and she actually mentions something that's really timely. Right now, when I'm recording this, we are in the middle of Republican National Convention week of 2024. And so we have Donald Trump we have Joe Biden, who is the sitting president, the former president, the sitting president, and then the most likely third party candidate that anyone would know about is RFK Jr. That's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And so she has a whole section here in the beginning of the prologue, and you can see it's this whole section right here, and then one more page. And so if you are considering RFK as a candidate, I actually would encourage you to just check out this page of the prologue. It's not a critical part for me, but her point in sharing it is the stories that we are about to read are actually still showing up and still impacting politics today. So this isn't just a story from 1963. This is a story where it still comes up. She also, in her prologue, deals with Ted Kennedy. You might know this story or not, but we're going to get to it later in the story. But she gives a very quick 2-page overview of the Chappaquiddick incident with Ted Kennedy. She said the Kennedys benefit from a perverse double standard. It's a double standard that is the clearest and most insidious when it comes to the crimes that Kennedy men have committed against women and young girls. Any victims who dare to fight back will find themselves confronting the awesome power of the Kennedy machine. And so that's what we see throughout this book, throughout the story that we're going to deal with today. She highlights the story of Ted Kennedy, who was lionized in his later years as a senator. But she takes us back to that story, and we're going to spend a significant episode at least on Mary Jo Kopechne, which was a woman whose life was taken because of Ted Kennedy. She points out that she's not telling these stories chronologically, so that's important. And the last, most important thing that I want to share is that the women are also complicated. And this is actually good news for us. She is not trying to paint a picture of perfect ladies who never did anything wrong, never had any impure motives, never were seeking power and money themselves. She makes it clear. She says, many of these women are complicated. They too were attracted to money, fame, and power, and that's okay. So her goal is not to whitewash these women, and that's good news. I think that's good historical research. So she finally points out, just for those who are interested, that the book's title comes from the most famous line of John F. Kennedy's 1961 inaugural address, where he says, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Right? And she says, "Ask not" has also been basically an implied admonishment to the women who were connected to Kennedy's, that you don't need to ask questions, you just need to go along with what I want. Don't ask for help, respect, justice, fairness, for your own opinions to matter. Go along with it and ask not. And so she says she takes this title as a dare. Ask not, she says, let's. So that's her note from January of 2024. And we're going to get right into, it's called Part 1, Icons. And we are dealing with the very first icon that she brings up. She starts with Carolyn Bessette. Now, for those of you who followed this story in real time, you'll remember, like I do, and my memory is a little bit foggy because this for me was junior high and high school. So I knew who JFK Jr. was, and I knew who Carolyn Bessette was. But I may not have followed this as closely or knew as much as you. If you're even 5 or 10 years older than me, this might have been more relevant in your actual life. And if you're younger, you might not have heard these stories at all. She starts out by saying, the minute she said yes, she regretted it. And that's going to be the theme of this whole chapter of Carolyn Bessette's life. And what's interesting is, for Kennedy lore, you can't get more darling and more Camelot, right, in the 1960s than sweet little John in his little adorable suit saluting his daddy's casket. That is just one of those iconic American images, and it kind of sealed the public's affection and awe at JFK Jr. And he really did garner the affection of the nation, but in a way that, like so many who have fame when they are young, really cost him a lot and was negative. So she comes in with the story of Carolyn Bessette. She takes us right in and just tells us this story about she's going against her gut. He wants her to fly with him in a small plane that he was still learning to pilot to a Kennedy wedding up on the Cape. He was taking pride in his newfound skill that he was not practicing near enough. And she was terrified. She told many, many friends, I don't trust him. I don't trust him as a pilot. Throughout this chapter, Maureen Callahan gives us plenty of insights as to that friends of his would not ride in a car with him, that he was just a dangerous rogue Kennedy. And he was kind of careless with other people's lives and other people's belongings. And so he wanted this big title of pilot, but she did not think he had the practice, the self-control, the self-assessment to actually realize that he wasn't actually that good of a pilot yet. And so she recognized that. But John was confident. He was overconfident. And this description, I'm just going to read you some of this page. It says, no one said no to John F. Kennedy Jr., heir to Camelot, the only living son of the beloved slain president, with movie star looks and charm to match. Now, I will say, if you are young and you don't know who JFK Jr. is, go look him up. I remember him being a very handsome man. He was quite a bit older by the time I knew him, so I didn't have a crush on him. But he was a handsome man. He was beloved, and he did fit the part of a movie star. Whenever John wanted to do something, the answer was always yes. Sometimes Carolyn would say no to John just to say no, to habituate him to real life, and it always stunned him. She stood up to him. Sometimes she wouldn't forgive his laziness or forgetfulness or lateness, and she was trying to make him realize other people are important too, not just you. So she became the only woman in the world that told JFK Jr., no, that's not okay. Don't behave like that. I won't put up with it. Don't take me for granted. That was kind of her attitude towards John F. Kennedy Jr. That's the opening scene, and we're going to get back to that in a minute. But she takes us to 1997 when John had just launched a magazine called George. And this was a very short-lived launch of a magazine. It was seen as an industry failure, actually, and no one was reading it. But not only that, it kind of gets at the core of something that was a massive amount of humiliation for him, that he really thought that the world saw his dad as very bright. The world saw his mother as very bright. She was fluent in French, and she was a well-read woman, especially for her era. She was very well educated. People thought his sister was very smart, but they did not think John F. Kennedy Jr. was bright. And so one headline was "The Hunk Flunks," and he felt that humiliation, and it was inculcating many of the things that we will see him choose to do. But she goes back in time and takes us back to the various elements that led to him feeling like a failure, not having self-confidence. He had a bunch of failed business ideas. Actually, I would love to know if you guys are reading along with me. Did this surprise you? It really shocked me to read about some of these failed business ideas. The most absurd one was he had an idea of a rent-a-dog scheme. like people are gonna want to, they're so enamored with walking dogs that they have to rent one. It's too fun. And this all stemmed from because when he would walk his dog, people would stop him and want to talk to him, and they would ask questions about his dog to be polite. And he thought, people are so interested in dogs, and not enough people have dogs, so we should start a business where people can rent out their dogs, and we would get a cut of the portion. So it's an absurd idea. It's obvious to any dog owner that if you wanted somebody to walk your dog, you're gonna have to pay them, because this isn't some kind of awesome thing that they're getting to do, some blessing in their life. But this was an idea that he had, and he thought, surely there will be a market because it's my idea and I'm John F. Kennedy Jr. So this this sense of the world owing him simply because of who he was something that he carried to his core, and he didn't have good discernment in these things. And so his mom like sent a friend to him one time that was like, hey, so if you have a business idea, you're going to pitch like this magazine, I'm gonna talk to you through this. And he tried to tell him, like, go slow, have your business plan in place. You want to have all your ducks in a row so that when you sit in a pitch meeting with an investor, you can not only answer every question that they have, but you can answer the next question and the next question, and you can give a robust defense for why they should invest their money with you, right? It's good advice. And Jackie O was the one who set up this time. But it says that he sailed into meetings. He did not do his due diligence. And he would ask for a $20 million investment. And we're talking about the 90s. So even now, $20 million is a lot of money. But back then, it was quite a bit more. And he would just go in and blase, just ask for 20 million without even being able to answer the most basic stuff. Like, who was the audience? What is the brand's identity? Who would John hire to write for this magazine? These kinds of questions. And he had no answers. He didn't know. I'm going to read this because it's too good. She says, John was like Seinfeld's bubble boy, so coddled and spoiled, he didn't even know what he sounded like to others. So John did not live in the real world. He lived in a constant feedback loop that was telling him, you're awesome, you're handsome, everybody loves you, you're so great, everybody would want to date you, everybody would want to be in business with you. He was rich enough that he didn't have to put up with anybody that told him any different. He didn't know what he didn't know. He's not interested to learn anything other than the things he knows. So Jackie, meanwhile, was expressing concerns. She says, he's never expressed any interest in the magazine business. He has no experience in journalism. He's not a good writer. He had so many people who were trying to sharpen him. I thought this was an insightful story about his carelessness. It says he rode around the city on his bicycle and never locked it up. He spent thousands of dollars replacing bike after bike. So this is a careless man who just uses his own things, other people's money. He didn't care. He's just thoughtless, careless. But one thing he is concerned about is appearances. I thought this was interesting. She says that he was a terrible athlete, totally uncoordinated, but he had a perfectly sculpted body and looked the part. He was a peacocker. He would preen and try to show off, even in like the showers and the gyms, in the place where he worked out. He saw himself as a standout, rare guy. Interestingly, she takes us back a little bit. Before we get back to Carolyn Bessette, we get a look at his first serious girlfriend, whose name is Christina. And it sounds like, based on the notes that I read in the back, that this woman is still alive. So she's either been a primary source for Ms. Callahan, or she's given enough interviews that Mrs. Callahan was able to access her continual thoughts about this man. He nearly killed this first serious girlfriend three separate times. And she tells these stories. I am going to consolidate them and just share with you guys highlights of his treatment of her while she was kayaking. He would take her kayaking out in the open sea. And embedded in this story actually is a hint that Jackie O had also experienced physical injury from encountering the Kennedys. It says that Jackie encouraged Christina not to go. She told her about hurting her ankle years back when she was engaged to Jack and playing touch football, trying to fit in with all those rambunctious Kennedys. That was the last time, Jackie said. But as was John's way, he pushed and pushed Christina until he got what he wanted. So before they knew it, they are out at open sea. It says the strong current pushes them towards a giant boulder, and her poor foot would be broken. Jackie O's warning was prescient. It was exactly on the money. Their kayak was about to fall apart. John F. Kennedy Jr. had forgotten to pack life jackets. They were going to die. Then suddenly a rogue wave came that lifted them up over this boulder, and they were deposited towards a beachhead. And she's sitting in shock, just catching her breath. And she looks up, and John is pacing, muttering, "Don't tell mommy, don't tell mommy." This is where it gets weird. This is where it gets insightful as to the Kennedy issues at the core of this man. The weird thing was the look in his eyes, like he was turned on. Dying, getting that close to it was a high for him. So we see that John F. Kennedy Jr. had an attraction to risk and to death. And surely psychologists could have a ball with this. I'm sure that part of that was connected to the tales he had heard of his dad and his uncle and the risks that they had taken. And there's probably some sense of, I want to do great things. I want to be ambitious and achieve and do the thing that's brave and not just wimp out of stuff. And he had an uncle, actually, John F. Kennedy's older brother, which perhaps it'll touch on in this book, but he had been a war hero and celebrated, and he actually died in combat. So he had been the son that was supposed to be the heir apparent, the presidential kind of big brother, and John F. Kennedy instead inherited that mantle. But surely RFK Jr., right, has all these stories circulating in his head of who he has to be. But here's the core question. Okay, you want to keep risking your life? That's fine. Risk away. Be as risky as you want to be. But why would he include women in that gamble? And this happens over and over again. The other thing that's kind of psychotic in the middle of this is that right alongside these experiences of near death, where she's being warned by, think about this, the first lady, who we all watched her in her beautiful pink outfit have her husband's blood splattered across her. We watched the most horrifying moment of her life. And so Christina gets to know this woman very well, to the point that she's warning her about spending time with her own son, right? You're close if that's what you're doing. And this woman is having these near-death experiences intertwined with him making little comments about, he recently visited his mother and she got some things out of the safe. Like what? Her engagement ring. So he's teasing her, which is just so cruel, right? Any of us who have waited or watched a friend wait for a proposal, right? So cruel. He's taunting her with that engagement ring. And then later, there's another experience where she's actually on crutches. She was healing from this ankle, and he takes her out, and they end up with fishermen in this random place, and he's willing to leave her there. Crazy. And they barely make it back again. I mean, you gotta wonder, like, girl, what were you thinking? Why are you going on a second kayaking trip with this guy? But she did, with a broken foot, and her paddle gets swept away, her crutches get swept away, and she is near death again. And at the end of all of it, it says later, years after his death, Christina was still unable to remember how they ever survived. When they finally reached land, John tied up the boat like nothing had happened, but Christina was shaking. John, we could have died. Yeah, Chief, but what a way to go. So that's how he saw it. What a way to go. That's how he viewed these terrifying moments in her life where she's already vulnerable. She's injured, and he goes and risks her life. He's willing to leave her with these random fishermen that they just meet on this island or wherever they were marooned for a moment, and they gave them dinner, and then he's like, well, I'm going back. And he would have left her there. And she's like, well, I don't want to be left with these strange fishermen in a random place, so I'm gonna go back with my boyfriend, but I don't trust him at all. And yet she goes back and she ends up near death again. So the final time he took her camping at a Navy bombing test site, and Jackie totally bawled him out for this, but nothing landed. Nobody talking to him. This bullheadedness. his sister talking to him, his friends, his mom's friends, wise people, political people, business people. It didn't matter who tried to warn him. He was not listening to any of it. And amidst all of it, he even, at one point when she was about ready to break up with him, he starts teasing the idea of baby names with her. Maybe we could, what do you think about this name? What do you think about that name? So clearly he did not marry her, but he was just stringing her along with these promises that never really happened. He dated some famous women, an 80s actress named Daryl Hannah. The one thing that stands out that he gave to her was while he was walking her dog, because he apparently loves walking dogs, when John wasn't looking, the dog wandered into traffic, got hit by a car, and was killed. So the one thing he leaves her with is a broken heart over her one thing that could stay with her, even if JFK Jr. wouldn't, is her dog. And no, that's gone now because of his carelessness. So now we're back to Carolyn. Miss Callahan brings us back to Carolyn, and now we have enough of a picture of who JFK Jr. was to re-enter this period of time when they start dating. I don't know if y'all hear that. My boys are yelling because there's Rangers games happening. So Carolyn, who, to give you a picture of this woman, if you don't know who I'm talking about, go look her up. It's Carolyn Bessette, Bessette. She's lovely. She was a beautiful woman, of course thin, but she was also this fashionista. She worked for Calvin Klein. She was very talented in her own right. We're told that she only dated wealthy, famous men. That's exclusively who was an option for her. But when we find her here, she's in his filthy shower. She is constantly cleaning up after him. He is a heedless driver. He speeds. He even drives up on the sidewalk if he wants to get around somewhere in New York City. He is not reliable in any way. He's not a grown-up. At one point, he tells her, there's an unwritten rule in Massachusetts whereby members of my family can commit murder and mayhem, and nobody bats an eye. Again, this is the Kennedy core that I think she's introducing us to this story and kind of shattering some images that we have, because truth be told, everyone wanted to love JFK Jr. He was, like I said, handsome, beloved, sweet, young little boy that we all watched go through grief as a nation. And so everybody wants to cut him some slack. Everybody wants to be kind to him because he's been through so much. Kind of reminds me of Prince Harry. Just thought about that. Anyway, but he's over entitled and he's terrified of being called dumb. And I'm gonna ask you guys, at this point in the video, if you have read this chapter, would you go down to the comments and comment below what movies came to mind for you, if they did, of Carolyn Bessette's life, because a particular couple of movies came to mind for me, and so I'll share those in a minute. But here's her life. She had zero experience in fashion when she was younger, but she was beautiful, and she sits across from the greatest American designer ever, Calvin Klein, and she, instead of acting like, because here's how I would act if I was in the market for this particular job. I would research my heart out. I would have edited my resume like 7 billion times. I would be early to the interview, right? I would be sitting so serious and answering all the questions and trying to do the best I could. I would have fashion knowledge at the ready and all of this. And here's how it says she went into it. It says, she sat across from the greatest American designer ever and acted as though she could take this job or leave it. That is the heart of Carolyn Bessette, because what we see later is that when JFK Jr. enters the Calvin Klein showroom for the first time, he does not know that she has the America's Sexiest Man magazine stuffed down into her kitchen cabinets. She knows who he is, and she definitely is interested. But when he first walks in, it says she knew exactly what to do. She ignored him. This was the key to hooking him, and she knew it instinctually. So this is a woman whose instincts are geared really different from mine, maybe different from yours. I don't know anyone like this actually who, I think back to junior high where like we would ignore a boy because we liked him, right? But this is how she went through her adult years, was she ignores him and tells him no, even while she has him in her sights. She is a student of wealth, that after a wealthy client would leave the room, she would pepper the other people with questions like, how does she get her money? How did she land that guy? Where do you think she goes to meet rich men? She was studying. She was laser beam focused on how to get wealthy. And as I thought about this, I don't know, I'd love to hear from you guys, but I just thought about, she was laser beam focused on wealth. And then the minute that JFK Jr. walks into her showroom, she's laser beam focused on JFK Jr. And she's a woman who knows how to get what she wants in the short term. But she didn't actually think beyond that. That's my assessment. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. But the more I read about her, I just thought she had some good strategies for how to hook a man in the beginning, especially a man who got everything he ever wanted. She understood that psychologically, the one thing that he can't have is the thing he's gonna want. And so she plays on that. It says the way to get John was to make him think that she was the prize, not him. As they grew closer, she would insult him just to keep him back on his heels, off kilter. But quietly, she'd marvel at his beauty. She wanted him so badly. More than anything, she wanted to be Mrs. John F. Kennedy Jr. So she knows she really wants it. She says she doesn't. She thinks he's really handsome. She says he's ugly or insults his appearance. So really an unhealthy relationship. An unhealthy woman, an unhealthy man, and a really unhealthy way of relating to one another. But that is what it was. And this is one of the things that really stuck out to me, is that these people live in a different world from you and I. May 24th, 1992. There was a big gala that night for the Amazon rainforest, the hippest cause going. Okay, so of course, who is going to be there? She's going to be there. And her friend says something kind of crazy. He says, you're going to die, which is what ends up happening to poor Carolyn Bessette. And he's like, you're going to die. John Kennedy is coming. Okay, so she goes to this thing. She badgers a friend, wants her tickets. Give me your tickets. You've got to give it. I'm your friend. This is important. I have to have those tickets. And the friend, because Carolyn Bessette tried to steal her boyfriend a while ago, so catty. There's so much cynicism and betrayal in this whole section. That friend is like, forget it. You are not getting these tickets. And the more you beg, the less I'm likely to give them to you. So she gets none. So I would like to say, I don't know if you've read this chapter, but it reminded me of totally The Devil Wears Prada. I felt like Meryl Streep is going to walk in at any moment when I was reading through this, because it just seemed like, wow, these women are catty. They hate each other. They are so rude. They have so many underlying motives. But the other movie I thought of was 13 Going on 30. I don't know if you remember that story. It was also the fashion world, and they were also backstabbing each other and trying to steal each other's boyfriend and steal each other's magazine cover. And anyway, reminded me of these two. And that is the world that she inhabited, was a very catty, cocaine-fueled, hyper thin, really unhealthy, not just relationally, but health-wise, a world that just really is full of problems. We're going to get into the plane crash later. This is just setting up the Kennedy mode and the unhealth of, I think, the women that they attract to themselves and the way that those things fuel on each other. I think it'll be interesting to watch this through different generations and different iterations in relationships as we go through the book. But then she says, being John's exclusive girlfriend. So this is all still pre-wedding, right? This is just girlfriend. Being John's exclusive girlfriend was a full-time job. Once they got serious, Carolyn began transforming herself. And she talks about, she says she treated herself like an art project, working on her weight, just whittling down the ounces. she's beautiful, but she takes the lines, and I didn't even know Botox was a thing back in the 90s. I don't think I heard about it until, I don't know, 2008, 2010 maybe, I don't know. But she's erasing her small lines in her face with Botox so that her face is just a sculpture. She's actually ironing her hair straight, and it says her scalp is scorched and pulsating under the bleach. The burns on her scalp cooled into hard raised scabs that you can still see in photos sometimes under her platinum mane. This was the era that she gets this right. Her thick eyebrows were plucked into wisps. That's why this is all still from high school and college. I overplucked because that was the era of overplucking. And so Carolyn Bessette was one of the ones that I have to thank for that, I guess. This so-called effortless style was actually full of suffering. It's really sad. Like, she's beautiful, beautiful young lady. And she is just contorting herself into something that's even more unattainable than what she already had. When John proposed 2 years later, Carolyn waited 3 weeks before saying yes. Part of that was her classic manipulation. Yes, torturing the boy who had everything was fun. So twisted. But Carolyn also wanted to sit with the actual question. Did she want not just to be John's wife, but JFK Jr.'s wife? She knew well that these were going to be two different personalities. The character that he played in public was affable, humble, all around a regular New York guy who just happened to also be the most wanted man on earth. So sexiest man alive, most wanted man on earth, but he is just playing it off like he is just humble, he's approachable, he is just every man. The actual John was a moody, complicated person, not nearly as low maintenance as that public persona. He was a mystery to others and most often to himself. Here's the essential problem. It says that Carolyn would be marrying someone who at age 36, he's 36 years old, he was still in search of his identity. That's the core, is that JFK Jr., for all of his being in a historical family, being in a wealthy family where you could be anything you wanted to be, having Jackie O as an encouraging, loving mother who just wanted the best for her son and tried to give him opportunities with education, with influences in his life, with opportunities for conversation. He's a 36-year-old petulant boy. That was the hardest thing for me to read. Actually, I did the math and I wrote down, oh my goodness, by this point, my husband was a father of 7. So at 36 years old, we have a big family. But at 36 years old, her husband who she's about to get engaged to is still a boy. He's still searching for his identity. She was 29, enjoying a fast life in high fashion, and she wasn't sure she wanted to give that up, understandably. But we get to the fateful day, and it's July 1999. It was John's cousin who was getting married up in Hyannisport, and he had just had a cast removed from his ankle. Lots of ankles being hurt in this situation. He was still in flight training, and he was not licensed to fly at night. He still needed to fly with an instructor with him, but he didn't care. He wanted Carolyn to come with him, and she did not trust him. So we're back to that very first picture. Carolyn Bessette not trusting him, and yet she caves. She caves on one condition. His flight instructor had to be on board. She didn't really want to go back. Actually, their marriage was kind of in a troubled, rocky spot at this point, and they were spending time apart. He had been photographed with an ex-girlfriend. He had screamed at Carolyn in a way that coworkers had heard. So there was a lot of problems in their marriage by the point we get to 1999. But she thinks, I can't divorce him. He's a Kennedy. And he's bringing my sister. He would not risk both of our lives. Like, he's going to be careful. And he's also, at this very moment, he is telling people that she has 5 times a week therapy sessions. She has a drug habit, which it had mentioned cocaine before, and that's part of how she stayed so thin. So we don't know all the drugs that she was on, but she was using drugs. He's telling people about this and that she would not have sex with him, which, I mean, if my husband was out being photographed with his ex-girlfriend, then I might have some things to say about that too, but she's not having sex. She's going to therapy all the time. She's having drug problems. And now he's telling everyone that Carolyn was crazy. She's so unhinged. She's so unhinged that I want to bring her to a family wedding. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what he's telling people, is that she is crazy. And so he pressures her into this situation. And she's feeling this is what it means to be a Kennedy wife. Last sentence, Carolyn really, really did not want to get on that plane. So that is the opening story of Carolyn Bessette. So much in there that's like sad and twisted and toxic. And you can just see their humanity. Like, he's this spoiled brat and she's beautiful. And she's also using the skills that she has to catch this man who's the hottest man alive. But they're both just so broken. It's a really sad story. Our next chapter is about Jackie Bouvier Kennedy. So that's who we are going to be reading about next. I just want to know, what did y'all think about these things? What did you think about JFK Jr.'s fascination with death? I would love to hear your thoughts about that. Where do you think that came from? I mean, I offered some options, but you guys probably have better psychological insights than I do. I have not taken classes in psychology or anything like that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about what was driving his fascination with death, and almost like the way she said it, like it was almost like an urge, like a lust for coming close to death. So I'd love your thoughts on that. The other thing I'd love your thoughts on is, what do you think of Carolyn Bessette's way of catching a guy? Have you ever known anyone that does that? Like, I don't feel like I have, but then I got married when I was 21, the day after I turned 21. So I didn't exist in a single space for very long. So maybe those of you who have, or who have had a really close friend or sister or brother exist in singleness for a while, I'd love your thoughts. Like, is this something that I just don't know a lot about? Like, just ignoring a guy and kind of turning him down and all that just to catch his attention? That seemed really interesting to me. The big picture that I thought of is just, it seemed like she always had an end game, but it was without real foresight as to what that end game would actually yield for her. And what it yielded for her, sadly, was her own death. So this is the end of episode 1 on Ask Not, the Kennedys and the women they destroyed. So next time we will be dealing with Jackie Bouvier Kennedy. And I'm so excited to read that chapter, you guys. So my goal, I think, is to just go ahead and probably release one of these a week. But if that pace starts to feel too slow, then it's possible that I could release more. And you guys just let me know what's good for you. I'd love to get feedback about pacing and whether or not you like the storytelling, and did I give enough backstory, and anything at all that you want to share. I am interested, because we are going on this journey together, and I want this to be enjoyable for you, and I want this to be able to fuel my physical book reading, which is one of the things that I have as a goal for myself, is just to do more of this, because I used to read a lot of physical books. I don't anymore. So you guys have a great day. Get the book if you don't have it already, and I'll see you next time.